Justin Santamaria, thank you for coming on the Techmeme ride home. And Justin Santamaria, thank you for coming on the Internet History Podcast.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Let's just dive right into it. You started at Apple in 2003. Is that directly out of college, or what had you been doing before you joined Apple?
Yeah, I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and came out to the Bay Area to go to college in '99. So in 2003, I joined Apple straight out of college. I think I interviewed there for 6 straight months looking for a role at Apple. It was my job coming out of college was to get a job at Apple.
So, that's an interesting thing to me. I've only talked to a handful of Apple folks for the Internet History Podcast, and most of them were in the era of, is Apple going to make it?
Right.
The late 90s or whatever. So, you would be right at that period where Apple obviously always had no problem finding talent, hiring talented people because they were Apple and they had a certain sheen, even in their worst days of this is where the cool kids are.
Sure.
But, so when you're joining in 2003, that's right when the iPod is taking off and Apple is becoming again this sort of player in the tech world where it kind of wasn't for a little bit, So just a cultural question of What was the energy like? Did you still get the sense of like, okay, we're still in a rebuilding period here? Or what was it like when you got there?
Yeah, great question. When I first arrived at Apple, I remember the iPod had launched. There was not iTunes was not on Windows yet, so they were using a third-party player for all of that. And in fact, my first project, you can imagine my excitement when I joined Apple, and my first project is to work on iTunes for Windows. And I was like, oh, that was not what I had expected. But hey, I got my foot in the door, and I was more than happy to work on that. The atmosphere at Apple going in was one that I would describe as in transition. What I recall back then were a couple of things. One, Apple was not out of the woods yet, and you could definitely feel that. One of the big things I remember was that the classic Mac OS, the old Mac OS, not the current Mac OS, and Mac OS 10 had been co-developed. And I remember Mac OS 9, what it was called at the time, completely winding down and that team being dispersed, and some cuts coming from that as well. And so there was kind of a not quite out of the woods, because iPod was this very niche, very successful, right? But still, it was like the experience was for Mac owners at the time. And Apple really starts to stretch its legs a bit after I get there, and you can start to feel momentum come from there. But it was still, I would say Apple still felt like a very small company when I joined, if that makes sense. And one that had been through a lot and was still fully, you could still feel the next part of Apple and the old Apple, quote unquote, part of Apple when I was there. And I would say through the course of, I was there for 10 years, you felt that kind of melt away over time.
You mentioned the interviewing for 6 months, it felt like.
Yeah.
What was the interview process? It sounds like there were multiple rounds. And
well, I think it's one of these things too. If you recall, I go into college and it's startups and the famous Socks.com and Webvan and all this stuff. And then the next year, come 2000, 2001, it's all gone. It's a wasteland, right? And I was like, this is very volatile. And so I think, I don't think that was just startups. I think the whole tech industry felt that. And so coming in 2003, and this was another example of Apple still not out of the woods. It wasn't like how it is today where there's mass hiring going on and you can't find enough talent. It's like, there's 3 or 4 positions open, in software engineering at the company. And it's the belt is still very tight. And in fact, I had been interviewing for different positions. And in fact, the position I got was not even software development. It was build engineering, which is basically the task of assembling the software, making it a reproducible compilation, and then assembling like the help documentation and the README file and putting all that on a CD to be pressed. And I was like the person that pushed the button that said, this image is basically ready to go get pressed. And it was kind of the last gate. So it was a very kind of operational role. But that was, for me, it was seeing the iPod and saying, wow, this is a really cool way to apply technology. But I think for me, it was also seeing that there was this vision that computing could be accessible to everyone, and that Mac OS 10 at the time, I remember being very swayed by, wow, they're putting like a really powerful Unix-based operating system and making it usable and beautiful and getting people out of the meta work of managing a computer, and really just trying to make powerful tools for people to do what it is they want to do. And I was like, that's a really, especially I think back then, a really kind of unique take on what technology was for. And so I was like, I'm going to figure out how to get into this company. So it wasn't so much that it was a long process, because I had a recruiter who kept trying to find the right role for me and believed in me, but it was just super competitive because there were so few jobs available. So I'd be waiting for a job basically to become available for me to interview for and try out for. And I took the first one I could get.
Well, so you mentioned working on the iTunes for Windows, but also don't you get started on iChat as well?
Yes. So
this is to put historical context in this. This is literally the height of AIM and sort of like the messaging sort of wars where they cut off access to this one to that one. So interoperability was a key thing or whatever. So tell me about iChat, and if I'm right about that, if that's sort of where you make your bones, tell me about that project.
Yeah. So my first job, so I was, build engineer. I come out of that doing, working on iTunes among other projects, and essentially internally moved to the iChat team. And iChat, like you said, the height of AOL Instant Messenger, and Apple had cut a deal so that, basically we get to piggyback off that network, and you can sign in to AIM with iChat was huge. That was the communications platform, I would say the personal communications platform of its day, and certainly the juggernaut. I come into that team and they're not even talking about sending messages to each other. If you recall, iSight cameras were going to be the thing that was coming out, and iChat was a perfect vehicle to show the power of how you can video conference, very simply and easily, and not just video conference one-to-one, but we were working on what we called internally U+3, which is you and 3 other people. And I don't know if you remember, but it had kind of the light boxes and the images, and it was like a pseudo 3D view. And I remember being a very new engineer on this team. This was, clearly at the time, this is 2004, a priority of the company. And I remember giving regular demos to Steve and being part of that team. And it's a U+3 demo, so it's you need other people. And so we're sitting, we have Steve, where he normally does his demos in a conference room, and then I'm in my boss's office with a teammate of mine, and then someone's in another office, and then someone's in another office. So there's literally like 4 computers set up to go. And I remember being instructed, like, whatever happens, pretend like it's going well. Like, because, it's beta software. This is like weeks or even months before release. And sure enough, the call connects, we hit accept, and it's just green. Steve, we can't see Steve. Steve's just green. And, hey, hello, Steve, how's it going? And he's saying, hi, okay, let's add another call. And it goes and it does actually, I think FaceTime still had it till recently, the won't sound.
Yeah.
And that's when it would like pop out from the 1-to-1 into like into the 3D view. And I remember Steve going, and literally this is my first, this is the opening, hey, interaction with Steve story. Oh my God, I'm going to make the crowd shit their pants. And what was really interesting about that is in his mind, he thought so experientially that in this very first demo of like new technology and everything, he's like, how is this story going to go? How is the demo going to go? How are we going to articulate this to the public? And it was so infectious. And I think that's something that I realized, being like, wow, like this guy's into this. He's not just, pretending when he gets on a stage. Like he's into this, and really minding that
people
moment.
Always say about him, oh, he was the best showman, whatever. But to be a good showman is easy if you actually really give a shit. Like if you really, really love the product, then being a showman is about, I can't wait to show you this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that was super legit with Steve. And I mean, I think when you knew he was excited about something, you knew, and I think it showed on the stage, right? It means like this landed in the right way, and no detail was too small. In the early iChat, the U+3 is like, well, how do you know if someone can accept that type of call, a multi-way call versus single-way call? And you're looking at the different icons and the different options, and it's like, nope, Steve didn't like any of those, or Steve picked this one. I was like, why do you pick that one? And you realize like, well, he can only pick among what you're giving him. So if you don't like it, don't show him. That's kind of your power as a contributor to the team. Like figure out what you want and figure out 3 versions of what you want and come to that. And one of the things that's really interesting is he could say no to something one week, and then the very next week say yes to that thing. And I remember early on being super frustrated, being like, why isn't he consistent about that? And I remember this for the icons, where it was like going to be a purple icon versus a green icon. And then it ended up being that it was like an overlaid green with like multiple, like it looks like it was stacked 3 deep. And the first time he picked purple, and I was like, oh, that doesn't make it, that's no good. And we switched back. And I was like, well, but he already picked purple. And it's like, well, he decided that was the bad idea. That didn't work. We changed it. And this idea of like, who cares what my past decisions were with new data and with new kind of insight or having ruminated on it, I changed my mind, and there's nothing wrong with that, is something that I think as a leader, many people are often pressured into like consistency. Like I must be consistent and I must stand by my beliefs. And I think Steve was someone who was like, if I believed that like we should turn left when the whole time we've been turned right, he was very clear about, let's just turn left. And as someone who was very early into his career, that has left a huge impression on me, in that the right thing to do is the right thing to do, even if you thought differently a day ago or an hour ago. And I see Steve practice that very regularly, and sometimes frustratingly so. You're like, I just tore all that work out of the product and now I'm putting it back. But it's like, you get paid it either way. Let's make it right.
At the risk of yada-yadaing other projects in your career and things like that, I'm assuming that working on iChat is what sort of, when the phone comes along, gets you involved in messaging and FaceTime and things like that. So but before we get to that, given the famously, secretive nature of the iPhone project and things like that, like you personally, what was your experience with first hearing about it, or first hearing inklings about it before you even know what it is? Give me some of that. Yeah,
for sure. So, I've been on iChat for about a year at this point, this is what happens. So we are all on the Infinite Loop campus, right? And iChat's offices are on the second floor of 2 Infinite Loop, or IL2 is what we call it. And one day it's like, we're moving. We're moving, and they're creating this whole lockdown on the second floor of IL2. And that's that, and you're like, huh, okay. And again, I'm early in my career, and I think I'm like a terrier, where I'm like, well, what's going on up there? Like, what, like that sounds important. Like, at the time that's where Scott Forstall's office is. Now his office is behind lockdown. That must be super important, whatever's happening there. Right. And so I'm like, I feel like I'm like, just trying to figure out what's going on. And what I start to see is that 1 or 2 people on each team, for Mac OS, a couple people from the mail team, a couple people from, what are the other teams? From, just different teams, 1 or 2 people no longer work on that project, are now working on the second floor of IL2. I was like, wow, that's interesting. Like, they're building something new. It's very clear. And they're using 1 or 2 engineers from each team to like put this thing together.
It's like they're rapturing people.
It's weird. It's really weird. Yeah. And for me, I just couldn't let it go, at some level, I'm like, I mean, I want to be on this team, right? Like, I don't know what it is. I don't know what they're doing, but that seems like if I'm able to, I want to go there. And what's really interesting, this ties back into iChat, and this ties back into like how little things at the time make huge differences. I had worked on a feature called Bonjour messaging, which was allows you to connect via iChat. You can talk to other computers on your network. And I had worked on it with a very senior guy. We had basically evolved Bonjour to be much more better behaved on the network or whatnot. It was like a smallish project, but it was good work that we did. And he had gotten, the call to join this top secret team. And so one day, and I remember it was a Thursday, and I remember it was, I believe it was WWDC week. Because there was that still when like stuff was happening out on the in the main area of the Apple campus when they would bus everybody. So there was kind of a party atmosphere, and I'm sitting at my desk, and I get a phone call. Oh my gosh, to even say that now, like I'm getting a phone call on my desk phone that's plugged into the wall, which is a thing back then. And it's this guy. His name's Jeremy. And hey, Jeremy, what's up? And he's like, hey. I go, what's up? He's like, you want to come work with us? And like, that's implying like, I know, I know the IL2 project, and I go, can you tell me what it is? And he goes, no. And I go, well, is it worth it? And he's like, oh yeah. And I was like, okay. And that was it. And, I meet who my manager's going to be, and meet a couple people, go through a very informal kind of interview process over the next week. And then, a week later, I'm in those doors of IL2 second floor. And with no idea, like I remember sitting down and them going, do you know what we're working on? I go, I have no idea. They're like, do you have a guess? And I was like, I think you're working on a phone, because that was a thing. Like, sure. It was like, I think we're going to work on a phone, blah, blah, blah. But there was nothing official about that. And they're like, yep, that's what we're working on. And I remember getting my first tour of the phone going, oh my goodness, this is, what people felt, I think, that day in January in 2007 is what I felt that day. And this is about 6 months before that, going, wow, this is very different. And I can't believe we're going to do this. I can't believe we're going to pull this off. This has a lot of work, like immediately I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a lot to do here. And it was, it's a point in my life that I'll never forget. And I remember very vividly, the day I joined.
Work uninterrupted, run your business with less stress, and get more leads from your marketing efforts with Smith AI. Smith AI provides businesses with award-winning virtual receptionists who handle your calls, chats, and texts to unlock new business at a fraction of the cost of hiring an in-house staff. Smith AI is not your average receptionist service. Since 2015, they've combined the best receptionists across North America with AI technology for superior business communications and customer engagement. Their friendly and professional agents can screen leads using your custom criteria, schedule appointments on your calendar, and call back leads who complete your forms. They can do it all by phone 7 days a week and also on your website through their 24/7 live chat service. They even answer texts and Facebook messages. Smith AI pays for itself and then some with all the new clients their receptionists help you win. Never miss another lead. Boost revenue, increase your focus at work, and keep your staffing costs down. It's as simple as forwarding your calls to Smith AI. Plans start at just $240 a month. Try Smith AI today. Our listeners will save $100 when you sign up using our promo code Techmeme at smith.ai. Visit smith.ai to read 5-star reviews and be sure to use our code Techmeme, Techmeme, to save $100 at sign up. Don't let another day go by. Try Smith AI. The beginning of a new year is a great time to finally start things like diets, workout routines, or thinking about your financial future. Even if you don't plan on getting off your couch in 2022, you should at the very least do one responsible thing while you sit there. Check out Wealthfront.com. You can start investing in no time with Wealthfront's classic portfolio or make it your own with things that you care about like socially responsible funds, technology, crypto trusts, or hundreds of other investments. Wealthfront was designed by financial experts to help you turn your good ideas into great investments without the hassle of doing everything yourself. Don't want to spend hundreds of hours trying to lower your tax bill? They help you do that. Not sure how to rebalance your portfolio or what rebalancing even is? They do it for you automatically. Wealthfront is trusted with over $28 billion in assets, helping nearly 500,000 people build their wealth. And the best part is, their product is so simple yet powerful that it has a 4.9 out of 5 stars rating in the Apple App Store. To start building your wealth and get your first $5,000 managed for free for life, go to wealthfront.com/techmeme. That's WEALTHFRONT.com/techmeme to start building your wealth. Go to wealthfront.com/techmeme to get started today. Well, and you know, you had worked on messages in, I guess the word I would use, it in a much more stable environment. But for the messaging with the phone, you have to interact with SMS and
Right.
you have to be connected to the network persistently. And so, you know, just those are some obvious headaches. But like, how tough of an engineering project was it compared to just doing messaging on a desktop?
Well, it was very different, right? Because what we aren't doing is figuring out, well, okay, what our feature set needs to be. It's like pretty clear. You need to support SMS messaging in the first one, right? And the abstraction layer had been built. Like, hey, there's we're going to abstract the idea of needing to know who the carriers or what their particularities are in a lower level framework. And so for me, I think there were two things that were really challenging. It was performance and memory, right? These phones did not have any power. I remember the first time we got an actual working prototype of the first iPhone that wasn't on a breadboard plugged into a voltmeter. It had no power management on it. And I remember it lasted like for 8 minutes. You know, it was like something ridiculous. And you realize, okay, there's no battery, you know, the type of power we're used to dealing with, even laptop power on a battery, is infinite compared to the amount of power we have on this. And then, you know, there was this very clear directive that this needs to feel real time. If you scroll and there's a delay, it ruins the illusion. Remember, this is before capacitive touchscreens aren't a thing, you know, and everybody's experience with touchscreens at that point were the resistive kind that were just garbage. Like they would try to do stuff and it's like, it's laggy, doesn't catch touches and all that. And it's like, we had to be as responsive as possible. So like basically, half of the project is optimizing performance and making it so it feels slick, and then reducing your footprint, your memory footprint, because this is a full multitasking operating system. And, I remember practicing for that demo that Steve unveils the iPhone with, where, he goes through and does like 8 things with the phone, and you're like, oh my God. I did that through my whole Christmas break, running through that demo over and over again. And so did the whole team.
When he hits the part that you're responsible for, when he demos the messaging and stuff, is it one of those things where you guys are just sitting there, just like, can't breathe? And,
oh my.
Yeah.
Yes. There's an excitement. I mean, you're so proud in that moment. Like you're like, you've busted, and I joined the team after a lot of the foundation had got set. They're like ready to really knock out these apps. And so there's people who are sitting next to me who, the past couple years of their life have been dedicated to The Secret. For me, it was, around 6 months of my life have been dedicated to The Secret. And you're seeing it come out and you're so proud, but at the same time, you have that feeling I can't speak for everyone, but for myself, you got that feeling in your gut, right? Like you're incredibly nervous. You're like, I hope this isn't that 1 in 100 case where that just doesn't work or that it crashes. And when you get through it, I think it's more when you're past that point where you realized how wound up you were, because you feel the wave of relaxation come over you. And it wouldn't be the first time that I had felt that. Maybe that was true because I had done some stuff for iChat and stuff that had gotten demoed. It was the first time that it really felt like it counted, but it wouldn't be the last of just absolute gut-wrenching experiences in, Moscone Center in San Francisco, in the second row, watching, something you've been working on being demoed to the public for the first time by the most iconic, salesperson of your generation.
This is a few years later, but again, in the interest of time, I'm jumping to FaceTime.
Absolutely.
FaceTime, just give me how that project is even conceived. I'm assuming it's pretty soon after that because, once you put a camera on the front, this is a phone after all. So it's about communicating with people. So how did that project begin? And
Brian, I think you line it up right. This phone's going to have a front-facing camera. And yeah, you can take pictures of yourself. There's not even a word for that yet. But who really wants to do that? Like, is that all that you need? You need something more, right? That tells you how quickly things that we take for granted just aren't things to take for granted. And also that camera. So it's like, what can we do with this front-facing camera? And for a long time, we were like, we want to do our own messaging service. We want to do our own video conferencing. We want to do these things. And now it's like, okay, here's a reason to do it. Because what is the feature set for a phone with a front-facing camera? It's like, okay, you can take your own pictures. That's great. What if you could actually video call other people? And so it's like, well, let's figure out how to do this. And the very early cuts of FaceTime are basically a port of what we do on iChat in terms of those connections. And, we have this, basically it wasn't called FaceTime at the time, but, the video calling app. And it's its own app, right? And it has basically like a buddy list, like you would for AIM, and so you have people there. And I remember very vividly that one Friday. So we normally demoed on Mondays to Steve, but on one Friday, I remember my VP or my boss, actually, Henri, and our program manager, Kim, coming to my office, like, Steve wants to see a FaceTime demo. And I said, great, well, I'll have it ready for Monday. And they're like, no, like, he wants to see it today. And it was like, 11 a.m. I go, okay, cool. I'll get it set up, this afternoon we'll be ready. He's like, no. he's walking over from aisle 1 right now and wants to see it. You have about 5 minutes. And, you're in development. And when you set up a Steve demo, especially on Mondays, you spend, your Friday's ruined. Basically, you're setting up for it. You're like prepping, you're making sure it's going to go as well as possible. You want the right conversation to happen. Let me put it that way. And I literally have to go into an engineer's office and I'm like, hey, do you have 2 phones that work? And he's like, well, they don't really, once they're connected, they work. But like the connection's flaky because we were bringing up the push notifications service to like.
That's almost nonsensical. These communication devices, once they're connected, you can communicate with them.
Right. I mean, that's the irony of working on software that's not built yet, where you're like, okay, there's some glitch here where the phone doesn't wake up when it receives a notification. So you got to keep the phone awake, and keep the phone awake, then it usually works. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I'm like, okay, let me just have it. And like, usually Steve deals with pristine devices. And so like, I'm getting a cloth, I'm like wiping them down for him and stuff, putting them there. And he comes down the hallway. Oh, hey, Steve, pleasantries are exchanged. And he's like, well, let's see it. So I hand him the phone and I hold the phone. And I go into my office, which is right in front of this interaction. He's in the hallway. So I go into my office and I look at the phone and I see Steve on the phone and I go, what I do when I normally test FaceTime, I go, I hold my face up, like this, and I count and I show the numbers to show the video and audio synchronization. This is like a standard test we do. So I go to Steve, I go 1, 2, 3, and he goes, what are you doing? Talk to me like a normal human. I go, oh, sorry. Hey, Steve, how's it going? How are you doing? He's like, I'm doing well. And I kid you not, Steve's holding his phone like this, which is not the most becoming angle that anyone's ever seen. And he goes,
he's looking down for the listeners.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Like he's holding it above his belly, essentiely.
Yeah. Essentially he's got it like at chest level, staring down into it at me. Yeah. So I've got this kind of like, the neck, the neck face type thing. And what's funny is I know that, we're all in a hallway. This is, now we've grown bigger and it's all basically the communications team is on this hallway. So all the engineers are kind of at the doors listening. I'll never forget this. And he goes, I look abominable. and you're like, oh, you don't. I'm going to be like, hey, Steve, you're holding it wrong. It's like, okay, like let's keep going on with the demo. And I remember coming out of that demo and a couple of things happened. One, it was like, okay, we have a lot of work to do. Yes, obviously, this was a completely impromptu demo. But 2, he was like, why is it a separate app? He's like, this should just be in the phone. You should just be able to tap a button and it go from a phone call to a video call. And I'm like, okay, like, it's at the end of the day, it's software, right? It's ones and zeros, it's dictionaries, it's strings. Could we do that? I guess we could do that. And I remember him like drawing the phone display of the 6 buttons on a phone call. And I remember going, what's the difference between pause and hold? and there is a difference. Effectively for the user, there isn't a difference, but there is a difference. Pause, you can't hear either side, whereas hold, I'm sorry, not pause and hold, pause and mute. Pause, neither side can hear each other. Mute, you're just muting your side, but you can hear the other side. And he goes, we don't need pause. And he X's it out and puts the like little camera icon. We should just put it there. And I'm like, okay. And literally we had to spin up a whole other project for like, well, how do you bootstrap your phone number or your phone credentials so that you can just have this one button upgrade to FaceTime? But it was in those moments where it's like, hey, 3 very crisp sentences, a quick drawing, and your project's like totally different now. And I think for the better. I mean, there's no question that's a much better experience. I mean, like, okay, now set up your FaceTime and like have a whole different list and all this stuff where it's just like, it's like making a phone call. And eventually we came out with a separate app and all that stuff. But it was that kind of work where you're just like, wow, like that's the kind of person Steve was. And then we had such a team that was like, well, let's figure this out. Let's ship this. Let's do this. And so within the scope of the thing we were already building within that year, because the hardware's got to ship from the factory on this date and time, we can't slip, we added a huge chunk of scope and we're able to pull it off, which is just, an incredible feat.
I kind of have to ask this when FaceTime comes out and Steve does the demo, and he says it's open source, open standard, industry standard. Everybody's gonna use this, and obviously that's never happened. And you can't speak for the different strategic reasons at different times. But what are your thoughts on the infamous industry standard of FaceTime? Yeah,
right. I leave Apple around 2013, which is right when this happens, or a little after this happens, because I do ship iMessage in the interim. My take on this is it was easy to say and hard to execute, and understanding like how that would look or what that would take was like very unclear, and I actually didn't really, I was very focused on the consumer side of making this work. And so I think there was a whole, like, how do we do that? And like, how does that actually end up happening? That I think those questions like end up taking a backseat. A lot of stuff happens in the interim. There's actually a lot of turnover of the team and of actually at Apple. I mean, in that period, Steve passes away, Scott leaves Apple. And so I think it's one of those things that through time, it gets lost. My take is what's interesting about things like FaceTime is the level of flexibility you have in a closed system. And I think this is like all products experience this, about how fast you're able to move, what changes you're able to make, what's a breaking change, how do you get this better and better and better. And when you go to standardize something, you kind of have to set up your stake in the ground for what's the base experience, and it's really hard to change that. And in many ways, that's why like sending a message across phones via MMS is a terrible experience. It's built for standards that are 30 years old or more. And so how you continue to develop on that and also create an open thing, it seemed it was a tall order. And I think, again, I can't speak for Apple, but I think there's still so much more to do over here, that I think the open part got lost along the way.
I thought of a way of how to do the Steve sort of experience question, and that's to break it into two. If you tell me your best Steve interaction where you're walking away from it on cloud 9, and also your scariest Steve interaction where you might have wet yourself.
Okay. I don't know if Steve ever caused me to wet myself. I have the lore stories like everyone else. I think that FaceTime experience that I told you, there was definitely that could have gone better, but we got a good day. The next demo needs to be better. And I think part of that was preparation. And part of that was, understanding like latency issues and things like that. And I remember going, that could have gone way better than it did. The funniest thing I remember, the thing that left me on cloud 9, and it's kind of a zinger story, is actually the launch party of the very first iPhone. It was at what was it? Oh, I forget what it was called, but it was the Exploratorium in San Francisco, which is kind of this interactive science museum. And, and it's the thing where it's like, oh, you can play with the things, and there's like the table of crab or whatever, and you've got like different stations and people are mingling. And it's super exciting, right? Because the phone is out, and this is like 2 days after, right? After the launch. And I see Steve, and we are just chatting. And I remember telling him, I go, I know this is going to be big. And he goes, why do you think? And I said, well, because my sister, who's infinitely cooler than I am, just waited in line in Austin, Texas for like 4 hours to get one. It's like, she's not going to wait in line for anything. And she waited in line for the phone. And not because I work here. She doesn't actually care that I work here. She just thinks this thing's super cool. I was like, if you have people like her doing that, like, this is a big deal. And he goes, this is the biggest product launch in the history. It's gotten more column space than any other product launch in history. And he goes, and the only thing that allows me to sleep is that unlike when we had the Mac, we have software update. And I laughed and he laughed and we went on. And I was like, oh, that felt good. I got a cool anecdote. We're chatting. And then I remember later on in the evening, he goes up to address everyone. And he goes, the iPhone's going to be the most successful product in the world. And I know this because it's had more column space than any other product launch in history. And the only thing that allows me to sleep at night is that, unlike the Mac, we have software update. And I was like, he was not talking to me at all. He was practicing for what he was going to say up there. And I was a test subject for how I would react.
Exactly. Well,
and I thought, did he just say that to everyone for that whole hour that he spoke to? Probably.
Either that or you dog fooded the joke for him. So
yeah. So he got a chuckle, so he used it. And I think that's for me, that moment. The reason I remember that moment, not just for that anecdote, but Steve is someone who wore his heart on his sleeve, and that was a man who was beaming about the thing that he had built with this team. And he was nothing but happy in that moment. And it's how I'll remember him.
Is your company or business having a tough time hiring the people you need? I mean, everyone from my local coffee shop to architecture firms to school districts seem to be having trouble filling positions lately. There are 46% more jobs being posted than before the pandemic, and there are 44% fewer candidates applying to each one. So you need to find the right candidates and hire them fast. Workable can help. Workable accelerates every step of your hiring process from find to hire. And Workable helps all types of companies of all sizes, all industries. Workable helps you cast the widest net possible by posting your jobs to all the top job boards, more than 200 in total, with just one click. Workable helps you evaluate and hire quickly with modern tools like video interviews and e-signatures. And Workable will help you automate repetitive tasks like scheduling interviews so you can spend your time on what's important, which is making hires. Whether you're hiring for your coffee shop or your engineering team, Workable is exactly what you need to hire the right people fast. Start hiring today with a risk-free 15-day trial. If you hire during the trial, which many do, it won't cost a thing. Just go to workable.com to start hiring. Workable is hiring made easy. Binge watching has become a common term now. Everyone knows it and does it. But most people don't know that our need to binge watch led to the most advanced networking hardware ever created. And they talk about it on the latest episode of that podcast that I've been listening to, the Traceroute podcast. You have to check it out. The Traceroute podcast is a 7-part series about the inner workings of our digital world. And on its 5th episode, they talk about how Netflix used to send out millions of DVDs when they started, but always knew they'd eventually stream content over the internet. They were just waiting for the network to be able to handle the capacity, hence the name Netflix. Each Traceroute episode includes interviews and stories just like this from some of the leading technologists, entrepreneurs, and innovators of the last 40 years. And I did a chapter on Netflix in my book, so I can tell you they've got their research right. For great tech history like this, listen and subscribe to the Traceroute podcast wherever you get your podcasts, or go to origins.dev and learn more. That's the Traceroute podcast. So again, I'm going to just mention that, you obviously worked on, CarPlay and the foundations of Game Center and all sorts of things. And I want to give credit to your time at Airbnb too, real quick in this way, which is to say that it occurs to me that, like Apple, Airbnb is a company that requires an intense commitment to the experience. So I'm curious if, not to put words in your mouth, but if you were able to bring some experience from Apple to your time at Airbnb.
Yeah, Brian, you hit the nail on the head. Deciding to leave a company like Apple, especially after 10 years, is very difficult. And you don't see a lot of people leaving Apple, especially from that generation of Apple. And what was cool is what I realized is that I had built up a series of lessons and anecdotes and just things about like what makes products great, or how did Apple make products great? And like, could I use this in other areas? Also, I had felt a little bit of, I had built this sandbox, and now I wanted to play in it. And I think Airbnb was a way to kind of do that, right? Like build a great experiences on a platform that you'd been working on for so long. And for Airbnb, I think you hit the nail on the head where it's like Airbnb is trying to provide an experience to people and happens to use technology to do that. I think that's kind of the arc of my career is like, how do you connect people and use technology to do that? And Airbnb has this unique moment when people travel, when people take trips, how do you do that? I think for me, the experience piece, Brian Chesky has in spades. He really echoes that kind of mindset, this passionate mindset about what a guest at Airbnb could do and could say, and what could be unique about their experience, and how do you make that better, and how do you instill a sense of confidence by doing a digital transaction for a real world experience. I think Airbnb had very strongly. I think what I lent to with my time there was, how do you get a large group of people to get together and ship something, on time and very well? And it's kind of the mechanics of Apple on the inside applied to this like very lofty goals. And it's like, how do you take something that's experiential and then break it down into projects and tasks and schedules and put it all together and still have a cogent, coherent experience at the other side. And so I think, my role at Airbnb was very much around some of the things like, I remember in 2014, working on the rebrand of Airbnb, from going kind of the website to the new thing. And there was a whole controversy about the logo and stuff back then. But, this was, a 200 person engineering team, a dozen designers, and like kind of, we're all going to do this and launch it all at the same time. And, that was something that to date Airbnb hadn't really done before. And I think it was, through some of that experience at Apple that we were able to pull that off. But also just trying to champion the fact that, just because you're an engineer doesn't mean you don't need to be empathetic toward what you're building for and who you're building for, whether it be a host or a guest. And I just try to instill that in the team. So I think my time at Airbnb was very much understanding, for me, working out what were my core skill set and how could I apply them there, and working on a product that I did feel like was trying to create the connection that I so value via technology.
Well, let's wrap it up by bringing it straight to the present and tell me about Future, and what is the experience of Future?
Great question. And Future is a digital platform where we connect people with real expert personal trainers to help people meet their goals in fitness and in health. And it sounds very simple on the surface, but for me, the key unlock here is that we have a fundamental belief that it's actually people who help people in this area and achieve their goals, and not stuff and not technology, but these things enable an experience to happen. I'm not like a fitness guy. And that's something that's interesting. So my co-founder and I, about 5 years ago, this is after me at Airbnb, we sit down and Rishi Mandal, who's our CEO, and I'm the CTO, we're co-founders. We start talking about, the state of health in America, and talking about how, every year millions of Americans resolve to try and get fit. And by the end of the year, 80% of them have failed. And that most of the solutions out there are about content and about kind of putting the onus on the person in terms of, hey, if this doesn't work out, it's not because the plan was wrong, it's because you didn't get it done. And for us, it's like, and for me, it's a very self-reflective journey, because I was like, I'm a busy person. I've done great stuff in my career. I have a wife, I have children now. I've had a hard time with my fitness, and I've stopped and started. I've been on diets. I've done all sorts of stuff. And what the realization is like, I lacked an infrastructure to like help me succeed. And if I could have someone who could provide me accountability, who could provide me expertise, and could also understand, like, they needed to meet me where I was. You know, it wasn't me being like, you told commit to something, but me being told, hey, I get it. You're busy. Stuff changes. Your kid gets sick. You have to work late, all this stuff. We'll figure out a way to make this work. And maybe some days it's a stretch, and maybe some days it's go run 4 miles. But the point is, we're going to just get you on a journey, basically, and we're going to do it together. You have support. You have a person. And so Future is really about connecting coaches, expert coaches all over the country with our members who do everything from get off the couch for the first time to already working out 7 days a week. And the cool thing about Future is we meet them where they're at. And this is the kind of digital hospitality that I learned at Airbnb, combined with this understanding that this is all done asynchronously with text chat through an app. And this understanding that now more than ever, you don't need to be physically co-located with someone to really receive the service that you need. And fitness, we believe, is no exception. And you can still have a highly personalized, highly engaging experience in doing so.
Well, I mean, you know, I'm sure you've thought of this, but the through line to all of this is it's messaging. Because, you know, I was looking up that,
yep.
You know, people I think are texting their trainers like 4 times a day on average and things like that. So this is the through line through all of that, is that the technology is just the communication. Right. That's
right. It's about connecting people with other people. You know, I'd like to say my whole career isn't about figuring out, building a new technology and figuring out how to apply it, but rather taking the building blocks that the internet and technology and communications and messaging provides, and how do we connect people in a way. With Future, what's really interesting is when a coach and client relationship goes well, yes, you're talking about your exercises and what your workouts are and whatnot, but it ends up becoming much richer because messaging is such an open medium that your coach gets to know about you and who you are, what your motivators are, what your blockers are. And it really becomes a relationship, a connection there. And what we do on the technology side is, how do we empower the coach to actually not have to pore over all of the data being generated by your watch, and actually digest that and really give actionable insight to our coaches so that they can provide a highly personalized experience at a scale that we aspire to be at. And that's actually a really intense technical problem that presents itself very simply to our members, which is like a very Apple thing too. It's like, it just kind of works, but there's just a lot going on behind the scenes to enable it all. Because what we want to do is take things like wearables and take the data that comes from there. And instead of making you the arbiter of that, you, the individual, you give that to an expert who can actually reflect that data and incorporate what they're seeing into your workouts or into your plan, and understand that in a way that I think right now we all feel kind of on an island trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do for my health? I know it's important. What do I do? We're trying to take all that stuff and make it actionable by putting a human in the loop. And it's actually a really different way of looking at fitness, and especially connected fitness and technology.
Well, so everybody check out the app, Future, get in shape. Yeah, go ahead.
It's about the journey. You know, I think I think that's the thing. It's like everyone starts somewhere, and we're here to wherever you're at, even if it's like not in shape, but it's like, get moving. That's fine.
Just get going.
Everyone's got to start somewhere. Yeah.
Justin, Santamaria, thank you so much for coming and sharing all those memories with us and telling us about Future and all that good stuff.
Brian, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.